Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Legionaries of Christ, and I teach theology. This is a podcast on the Star Quest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 203, and we're giving a general overview to Apostolicam Actuositatem, which is on lay spirituality, and we're going to lay apostolate precisely, and we're going to talk to Janet McLaughlin, who's done a lot of work on lay apostolate, lay spirituality. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details, sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. So putting a global context to this, we remember that Vatican II has a whole series of documents, and we've been reading the plan chronologically by publication date. This one, Apostolicam Actuositatem, just means apostolic activity. It's nothing super fancy in the title. It's, like we're talking about lay apostolate, the title just means apostolic activity. The bishops approved it 2,340 to 2. So it was about as close to unanimous as you can get. That's like less than 0.1% of the bishops had voted against it. So like 99.9%. And so let me introduce Janet McLaughlin, who we have on the here today. She and I worked together probably like 8 years ago on a project for trying to train lay spiritual directors, 8 or 10 years ago. I don't remember the exact time frame. She has a Master of Arts in Pastoral Studies, summa cum laude from Holy Apostles College and Seminary, certificate in spiritual direction from Divine Mercy University, serves on the advisory board for the USCCB's Office for Natural Family Planning, and she's a spiritual director, writer, speaker. She lives in rural Oregon with her husband. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Father Matthew. I'm so happy to be here. When you extended the invitation, I said to my husband, look, I got a present in the email. And he was like, what? And I said, I get to talk about one of my favorite things. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I think it's very valuable to talk about the lay apostolate, the ministry of lay people, because so often people forget about it. And that's really what we're going to get into today. So our outline today is for introducing Apostolicam Actuositatem. We're going to have 5 points. Usually we have 4, but first I want to just talk about what a lay person is and a lay apostolate. And then we're going to follow the basic 4 points that I usually have, which is kind of the history before the document, the key themes of Apostolicam Actuositatem, an outline of the document, and then later development and newer magisterium on the topic. So Janet, the first definition of a layperson seems rather negative, not a cleric or religious. But that's kind of incomplete. What would you add? How would you define a layperson?
Okay. I'm going to answer that. I want to say one thing. As you can tell, the title is not easy to say. So I'm either going to say AA or the decree, right? So
that's fine. That's fine. Okay. Just so everybody, it's not Alcoholics Anonymous on here. It's Apostolicam Actuositatem.
Right. But it is a tongue twister in the Latin. So anyway, the definition, is it negative? And actually, John Paul II had that very question in Christa Fidelis Laici, is who are the lay faithful? And it's just, the council went beyond predominantly negative definitions of the past to a positive vision, displayed a basic intent of asserting the full belonging of the laity to the church and its mystery and the uniqueness of their vocation. So yeah, that's a common question. Few popes later, he has to address that same question. When I look at it, I don't necessarily see negativity. I see distinction, because in Lumen Gentium, which you've already covered, it says the term laity is understood to mean all the faithful except those in holy orders and those in the state of religious life. So we can say the laity are the main group, and the ordained and religious are excluded. And in fact, I was watching a little video recording of 2 priests who were talking about their discernment. And one of them said, well, we're the ones who discerned out, right? So the laity are the main group of the church, and they discerned out from that vocation to their own vocation. So that's kind of just a little twist that makes it fun, I think, to think we all, as the faithful, all Christians, baptized people, share in Christ's functions of priest, prophet, and king, right? Then those are in a different way once you're ordained. But we all share a common mission of the Great Commission. Go to the nations, baptize them, teach them, right? That's for all of us. So the laity make up the bulk, the priest and a religious, well, we often say, well, laity aren't those, but in the document, Lumen Gentium, it says, well, the laity are the bulk, and those, the priest and the religious, aren't that. So it's kind of whichever way you want to think about it.
Oh, definitely. That's an important distinction. I mean, it's like, even for most of us who are priests religious, the majority of our family are lay people. Like I'm one of four, and I'm the only one who's not married. I'm both a priest and a religious, and all three of my siblings are married with kids right now. So, what does being a layperson mean for you, and what role did it play in your conversion?
Well, I began my conversion to Catholicism when I was 19. I was attending a evangelical church, and the precipitating factor for me was I just got to a point that it's like, okay, this is like revival every Sunday, but like we're all revved up, and where are we going? Like, what is our mission? Yeah, it's to convert people, but there just wasn't that same sense of mission that I found when I started looking at what the Catholic Church taught about the laity and their role in the church. So for me, the church's teaching on the lay apostolate, the lay vocation, were huge factors in my conversion. So
Excellent. And this document doesn't just talk about the laity, it talks about lay apostolate. I don't know how common that word apostolate is in the common parlance of somebody who's showing up to Mass every Sunday. Can you explain what is meant by the lay apostolate there?
yeah, I think that's really important because, as you know, the church documents talk about apostolate, and sometimes people want to say, oh, well, we're just going to call it mission or we're just going to call it service. But I think to get the full sense of the document, we need to help people expand their vocabularies and actually use the words that they will be reading. So what do we mean by lay apostolate? It's, again, you read this in Lumen Gentium, right? The lay apostolate is participating in the salvific mission of the church itself, right? So we have a specific role, which we'll be talking about as laity, and the way we achieve that is our apostolate. And the Catechism goes on to say the apostolate's everything that helps us move towards attaining that goal. So the vocation of the laity in number 6 of our decree that we're discussing now is the lay apostolate is participation in the salvific mission of the church, quoting Lumen Gentium. And then it says, the member who fails to make his proper contribution to the development of the church must be said to be useful neither to the church nor himself. So it's super important, right? It's essential to who we are as lay people that we live an apostolic life, that we go out and bring about the kingdom here on earth. And that mission for the laity particularly is to take up the renewal of the temporal order, right? So we'll talk about that. That's the language they use. So one time I was talking to my daughter-in-law and I said that, and she said, what does that mean? What does that mean? And I said, it means we have to make a difference in the world. It's not just that we stay, pray and that we live a moral life, but that we are, by our nature as lay people, called to be in the world and make a difference in the world.
No, definitely. I think there's a lot of things like that. And sometimes it's like the small difference. I know my mom's got very involved in Catechesis of the Good Shepherd in her retirement, as she has grandkids. And that's one way, like as an example, where it's not like this, earth-shattering thing, but I think a lot of young kids are now getting to know and love Jesus better by her running Catechesis of the Good Shepherd. And I think she runs two different programs right now.
Yeah.
With
and that, Father, if
ahead.
I can interrupt you just a minute there, I had looked up, did John Paul the First say anything about lay people, right? Because we were looking at all this to the continuation. And on that point particularly, it's worth commenting, he said, and this is while he was Pope, but the Lord loves the people who are not in the headlines, who don't appear on television, but who are living the gospel in everyday life. And so I think, like you're saying, those little things that make a difference in the lives of maybe not, global perspective, but on the practical, how do I live my life? How do I live my faith, even with the children, are so important.
Oh, no, definitely. So the final thing in this first section is really talking about lay movements or other organizations. Like there's a lot of Third Orders, Opus Dei, St. Vincent de Paul, Catholic Charismatic Movement, Catholic Worker Movement. I know you've been involved in Regnum Christi and been involved a little with the Catherine of Siena Institute. Can you explain a little bit about like what these movements or lay spiritualities have and what they add to this kind of aspect of being a lay person in the lay apostolate?
Sure, I'd love to. So first of all, the Catherine of Siena Institute is more a source for formation. It helps people understand how they've been gifted by God with spiritual charisms to help them live what they're called to as lay people. But regarding movements, it actually is a story in my life. My husband and I had been married about 6 years, and we moved to a parish that had secular Franciscans, Third Order Carmelites, Knights of Columbus, Catholic Daughters, St. Vincent de Paul, a lay Third Order Dominican, and Charismatic Renewal, right? So this parish had a whole lot of lay activity going on. And then it had Capuchin priests and Sisters of the Holy Names as religious. So we had a lot of exposure to a lot of different spiritualities in the parish. And for me, there was something incredibly attractive about these different groups, the idea of community life around a shared spiritual life and purpose. And, it beyond just belonging to the parish. And for me, I think I was blessed because I saw that I wasn't called to any one of those things. Well, I thought they were beautiful. It's like their charism, which I didn't know the word at the time, but it was their charism, their identity, didn't resonate with me. And so when I then encountered Regnum Christi, it was like really like my heart leapt within me, like, oh, this is what God is calling me to. And so what it's done for me, my life in Regnum Christi, is it provided a unifying force in my life. Like I was like, okay, how should I pray? What prayers do I need? I need more prayers. This gave me, okay, here are our prayer commitments as Regnum Christi. I was very apostolic, but this put it in context with the rest of my life. It gave me communion in my team life. And so I think that that's one of the things sometimes people hunger for more, and God gives them the gift of a charism as a way of living their baptismal call in a specific way. And I think now, you think about most of the priests in the world are diocesan priests, right? Good and holy men. But some priests like you and others, he calls to a specific religious vocation as well. And so I think sometimes the people called to the lay movements are kind of like that, right? That yes, we all called to be active. The people, like when we're talking about this decree on the apostle of the laity, we're talking about every single Catholic. So we're all called to have an active living faith. But for some of us, he calls us to express that in a particular way through a charism.
Excellent. Yeah. So moving on to the situation before this document, really, how would you describe the situation of lay people or the idea of lay apostolate in the decades before Vatican II, like the first half of the 20th century or thereabouts?
Yeah, I think one easy way to look at a comparison is to look at the Code of Canon Law. So the Code of Canon Law from 1917, and then the Code of Canon Law revised per the request of this decree that we're talking about in terms of the laity. In 1917, there was no section dedicated to the laity, and the laity were mentioned in about 20 to 25 canons, often about obligations or restrictions. As you said in your discussion of Lumen Gentium, the kind of attitude was pray, pay, and obey, right? And right, and that's how many people saw the church. But in fact, a little bit earlier, John Henry Newman had now Saint John Cardinal Henry Newman had written a work called Consulting the Faithful in Matters of Doctrine, and a response he got to this was, "What is the province of the laity to hunt, to entertain? These are matters they understand, but to meddle with ecclesiastical matters they have no right at all." Right? So it's just like, okay, go out there, do your stuff. You're not really part of the church. And so again, that kind of separation between the laity and the church. And then Bishop Barron, in a talk he did, talked about Dorothy Day, co-founder of the Catholic Worker Movement, saying how unfortunate it was that there was this commandment spirituality for lay people and a council spirituality for clergy and religious, suggesting that lay people just do a minimum, obey the commandments, while the people who have a greater call to holiness then liturgical councils of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And this is what Vatican II rejected, right? This kind of tiered understanding of our roles in the church in terms of holiness. And so back to canon law, 1983, we have a whole section devoted to the laity and 40 additional canons, more or less addressing the laity and making their identity and their role explicitly apparent, the Vatican II spirituality of understanding.
Oh yeah, definitely. I sometimes say, there's probably in a lot of parishes, there's probably some old lady who's holier than me. That old lady who sits in the back of mass, goes to mass every day, and prays the rosary, and everybody goes and asks her for prayers. It's a good chance a lot of those ladies are holier than me. I'm both a priest and a religious there. The next question I had is, you might already say it's already answered because we're talking about the universal call to holiness, but I just want to note Lumen Gentium there in number 40, where it talks about this idea of the universal call to holiness, and it says, all the faithful of Christ of whatever rank or status are called to the fullness of the Christian life and to the perfection of charity. So that perfection of charity is a way of expressing that holiness and things like that, like the perfection of love. Charity, love are, in Latin, it's the same word. And things like that. And so how would you describe this call of most lay people, and what does it mean to you, this kind of universal call to holiness?
That's a great question. And I thought about this over years, right? And I think one way of illustrating it is a few years ago, I was doing a presentation for a group of catechists, youth ministers, RCIA presenters, DREs, like kind of the gamut of parish people involved in formation. And I asked them, how do you want to go to heaven? And everybody raised their hand. And then I asked, how many of you want to be saints? And only about half the people raised their hand. And I said, okay, you understand that even if they're not official canonized saints, the only people in heaven are saints, right? So it's important that we aspire to that, to sanctity, to aspire to sainthood. And what that indicates to me is that there are a lot of Catholics whose holiness is something unrealistic or separate from real life. And another perspective that points to the separation of holiness from everyday life is the idea of, if I just pray, if I just am moral myself, if I just live a good life, then without any sense of apostolate, then I'm holy. And, in Christa Fidelis Laici, John Paul II wrote, if lack of commitment is always unacceptable, the present time renders it even more so. It is not permissible for anyone to remain idle. And then that vocation to holiness is intimately connected to mission and the responsibility entrusted to the lay faithful in the church and the world. So we can see from the beginning in Lumen Gentium that then through this decree that we're talking about on through like other documents on into Christa Fidelis Laici, that idea that holiness engages the whole person. It engages us in love of neighbor as well as love of God.
Okay, yeah, definitely. Those are the kind of things that we have to talk about when we're talking about that universal call to holiness. And that's really the first, like we're moving on to the key themes. That's really the first key theme. We've talked about a bit. Did you want to add anything about the universal call to holiness that's specifically in Apostolicam Actuositatem?
I think when we look at it the way I was just mentioning, that we can see that lay spirituality, are the way we're going to be holy, is essentially incarnational. All right. It has to do with the world and temporal realities. Like the world and its things in it are created by God as good and given to us to use and govern. And so as lay faithful, we are called to bring the laity to the world, improve the temporal order, build the kingdom here and now. So again, just emphasizing that that holiness is here and now, not just, a more eschatological look into the future, right? Your vocation is more that. Ours is more building the kingdom here.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of leads us to our second theme here, which is really that idea of each layperson being called to do apostolate. And how would you describe that theme? What is that really trying to get at for the average person who's showing up to Mass on Sunday? What is their kind of like call to do apostolate mean for them?
Yeah. Well, the call to holiness means something once you get out the door, besides prayer, right? It's our baptismal call includes apostolate, not just a spiritual life. We're through baptism, we have the right and duty, is what this decree says, the right and duty to apostolate. And that then strengthened in our confirmation, we are assigned by the Lord himself to apostolate. So it's not activism. It's not just go be busy. We have to be in a living union with Christ for the apostolate to be successful. But Christ is the source. So yes, love of God. We have to nurture that relationship with him. But then he calls us. I mean, to me, it's an amazing thing that Jesus trusts us to participate in his mission, to be his representatives on earth, to carry out all that he wants the others in the world. So, yeah, so that I would describe it as participating in the mission of Christ, who's called us himself and given us the mission of working in the world to bring about his desires.
Excellent. So the last theme here is you kind of referred to it already, but it's the sanctification of the temporal order or the order of this world. Temporal just meaning like in our time and space. And that idea of that secularity as in not being religious, not of the lay vocation, and how lay people are supposed to sanctify the entire world, not just the church itself or the religious aspects of our lives. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons I think this is so important is that after Vatican II, shortly after Vatican II, I think it was in 75, when Paul VI, Saint Pope Paul to be right, the sixth, allowed lay people to be lectors and extraordinary ministers of communion, right? People kind of like, oh, this is a new thing that we can do. And they flocked into the church and they started feeling this is the moment of the laity. We can do these things in the church we haven't been able to do before. And that's really, Yes, we can. And yes, those things are important, but that's not our primary mission. We are called to go out and the renewal of the temporal order is called our special obligation, and we have to act directly to improve a definitive way. So the aids, like all the sacraments, our prayer life, sacramentals, are things that are supposed to help us live that in the world. And our the duties of our state in life, the secular duties, going to work, taking care of kids, being on a PTA board, those kinds of things, um, do not separate our union with Christ from this life, but they help us grow in union. So we try to live Christ in every moment of our life. I mean, you do too, but right?
Yeah.
But our life is different. And
Yeah.
so everywhere, work, school, etc.
Yeah, no, it's really that sanctification of those aspects of, whether you're studying university, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a plumber, whether you're an IT specialist, whatever else. But how do you bring Jesus into that work? Because that's not necessarily religious in itself, right? Like the IT specialist, he's making sure the computer systems run for this company or this or this government or something like that. And it's not like there's something super religious about making sure that, the state of Nebraska's computers run right. But you can make that work holy by sanctifying it there. So moving on to the outline of Apostolicam.
Let me add one other thing here. Thank you. And it's not just the work itself, it's those with whom we work, right? You have that opportunity to witness to them. But I also wanted to mention an important point that comes up in the decree is the idea that, we exercise our apostolate, as I said, sometimes in church, hopefully often in the world, spiritual and temporal. But those things are connected. They're not discrete, separate from one another. And it says that in both orders, the layman, being simultaneously a believer and a citizen, should be continuously led by the same Christian conscience. And I think that's one of the things that we see in this challenge of sanctifying the temporal order is that we can check our faith at the door of work, that we can check it like the politicians. We see this a lot, right? Well, I believe this personally, but. And so that we're challenged that we have one conscience, the same conscience that we use regardless of where we are. So thank you for letting me add that.
No, that's a good idea. And so moving on to the outline, there are 6 chapters on Lumen Gentium. I'm just looking for a sentence or two outline, and 1 or 2 of them I think we've already covered very extensively, so we might just skip them. Like chapter 1, the vocation of laity to apostolate, I think we've already talked about that a lot.
Father, let me say one sentence, is that what we see, and this is actually more in an introduction than it is in the actual first chapter, but there's a sense of urgency. Like it talks a lot about the importance of now. And so, and this is, this came out, 65. So how many years ago are we, Father? 60 years ago?
60 years today.
Years ago, the church is saying, the world's a mess. We need to take care of this. You need to be out there on the front lines. How much more now is there that urgency? So thank you.
Yeah, no, this is exactly the 60th anniversary of the end. That was part of the motivation for making the podcast this year as opposed to last year or next year or things like that.
Yeah.
So chapter 2 is about the objectives. And what does the document say in those objectives?
Right. 3 principal goals of the lay apostolate. So that sanctifying the temporal order. So evangelization and sanctification of humanity, renewal of the temporal order according to the gospel, and works of charity and mercy. And so those are all then flowing from that charity that you spoke about as the soul of the apostolate.
Definitely. And then 3 and 4 are the various fields of apostolate and the various forms of apostolate. Can you summarize those two and explain what their fields and forms is there? Because on first glance, somebody might think, isn't that title the same as the previous title?
Yeah. Okay. So fields are where lay people are called to serve. Family life, social life, professional sphere, within the church, right? So that wide spectrum of pretty much everywhere you go is a field of apostolate. As I said, in the church, we have Eucharistic ministers, we have CCD teachers, we have lectors. In the family, the domestic church, evangelize, not just as parents, right? We don't just catechize our children. We are the first heralds of the gospel. So we are evangelizing our children and with hospitality, in encouraging others to see something different and be called to the gospel. Society, we have politics, culture, economy, right? Social issues. And then our friendships, our like to like ministry that we can be called to. So those are the fields. So what are the forms? The forms basically are individual, which we are all called to, and then group, right? Group apostolate sometimes can help us be more effective because we can reach more people. We can work together. We have different strengths or talents. And so, and those could be just you're getting together with people to do something, or it could be something organized like a lay movement per se.
Okay, excellent. Now, chapter 5 is on the external relationships. What is meant by external relationships there?
Well, it means the external relationships is that though the laity have this right to work to build the church, right? They can have a good idea. They can start an apostolate as long as Catholic, they are good to go, right? But they are still under the authority of the bishop. They still need to work with their pastor. And so for something to be called Catholic, right, the bishop has to have overseen it to be able to validate that it is indeed fully Catholic. And so we need to always be cognizant of our church leaders for unity and effectiveness and working with other organizations. And I think this is one of the places when we talk about Vatican II going awry, sometimes that comes up that lay people are like, we can do whatever we want, right? It's not quite, we need to work within the structure that God gave us, the structure of the church, and that we're still called to be part of a whole, right? The body, we are one body, and we work within that rather than just deciding, just to be a lone ranger or a group lone ranger. Does that make sense, Father?
Totally. And the last chapter we have is formation for the apostolate, which I think is pretty straightforward, but how would you describe it?
Just that lay people need spiritual, doctrinal, practical formation to fulfill their mission, right? That it depends on what you're doing, right? There may be some particular apostolate you're working in that needs a specialized formation, but that we all do need formation in order to be effective.
Okay, excellent. Now we move on to what's happened since this document, Apostolicam Actuositatem. Right after the document, soon after the document, the Vatican set up a department for the laity. It's gone through various names. It's currently called the Dicastery for Laity, Family, and Life. What is its mission, and what kind of things does it do?
Well, it pertains everything that has to do with the life and apostolate of the lay faithful, pastoral care of young, family, and its mission, and following God's plan and protection and support of human life. Now, some of the things that it does, like World Meeting of Families that we've we hear about. We see like Philadelphia. I don't know, it's been 10 years ago that Pope Francis was here for the World Meeting of Families. That's about every 3 years. Um, they instituted World Days of Grandparents and Elderly for us to recognize their contribution and our need to support them. There's an international summit on sports, right? So again, think about that there's an office of sports in the Vatican, and they pay attention, right? Because that's so important to uh, countries knowing each other, right? We can think about the interactions with the Olympics, but also the good of the human person and the things that we can learn from that. So that's some of the kinds of things that they do.
Excellent. Yeah, you're mentioning the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia. I'm remembering I still have a water bottle that you can barely read out that I got from there because I was technically part of the press there. So they gave all the press like this yellow water bottle, and I still use it pretty regularly, although it's very hard to read what it says anymore. Religious poverty. I keep just using what I have rather than buying something new. So now, probably the biggest other development in the time since this was Christi Fideli's Laici of John Paul II. I think you already mentioned it. It was written in 1988, and it was a follow up to a synod in 1987 on the lay people. What does it really add to Vatican II with from John Paul II here?
I would say it's an expansion, right? Like we often here's a new idea, and I think this is one thing to think about with the Vatican II when it came to this decree is in the other topics there was like a wealth of documentation, right? They've been writing about lots of pieces that were in these documents, for a long time. But when it came to the laity, this was new, right? This was new. So Lumen Gentium, Gaudium et Spes, that you'll be coming to, decreeing the apostle of the laity, they didn't have a wealth of documents to draw on. So they're foundational. And so then as we go forward, we're really in this place of expansion. What did this mean? How do we apply it? What's a deeper experience of that? And so John Paul II, with that synod on the laity, that was the precursor to the decree to the Christi Fidelis Laici, then expanded what does that sanctifying the world from within mean? What does their secular nature mean? So expanding that, it gave greater attention to the role of lay associations and movements, helped people recognize the importance of their role as domestic church, informing their children and other children. It was emphatic, as I shared earlier, about each person's responsibility for participating in the church's life and mission. So it summarized themes, but then kind of enriched them with a theological understanding and highlighting that co-responsibility of the lay people to build the church in the world and evangelize.
Excellent. Now, after John Paul II, we've had two, and now we're very, very soon after our third Pope St. John Paul II, because we're recording this in late May. So I think it's been about 2.5 weeks since we've had Pope Leo, or is it 3.5? One of those two, 2.5 or 3.5 weeks since Pope Leo was elected. Pope Benedict, what do you think Pope Benedict added to the understanding of the lay role in the role of the laity?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Because even though Pope John, as I mentioned, John Paul I, he's only Pope 33 days, and he still gets in a comment that the lay person must live his Christian life fully without separating faith from every day. Then Pope Benedict goes on and talks about the importance of the laity, going so far as to say they are co-responsible for the mission of the church. They're not just collaborators in the sense of the laity gets the good idea and then lets the lay people help, right? But that we are actually co-responsible. So that's, a change, right? A change. And then he emphasizes that the place of the lay vocation is the secular world, to witness to Christ in every human situation. So, that's, again, just emphasizing the role of the laity.
Excellent. And then Pope Francis didn't really have any one document larger than the laity, but he did mention what we have now as the hour of the laity and talked about being missionary disciples, both lay people, especially lay people do that. How do you see his vision for the laity?
I think his vision is that he emphasized the dignity and responsibility and missionary role of the laity, right? Like, we are all missionary disciples, as you said, right? And so he echoed all that his predecessors had said about the identity of the laity being to sanctify the world from within, to actually to own their identity as people who are following Christ and bringing others to him.
Excellent. So I think that concludes the kind of summary of the of Apostolicam Actuositatem and putting it in place with what was before and what came after. So Janet, when we were emailing, you mentioned you're part of a new initiative called First Fruits, which is a support group of some kind for Catholic parents. Could you tell me and the listeners a little bit about it?
Yeah. First Fruits, a friend of mine, Kathy Conklin, and I have been working on this. We had a great desire for young families to understand the vision the church has from not just, here's discipline, how to discipline your kids, or here's how you catechize your kids, but what is a holistic vision of what the church families. And so we talked about it and pulled 12 principles of family life, beginning with your family as sacred, fatherhood images God's love in a specific way, motherhood images God's love in a specific way. Each person is unique and has their own vocation and mission. Faith begins in the family, and the family prepares the children for life. Okay, that's the first year, six principles, 6 more for the second year. So Father John Bartunik recorded videos for us. Father John Pietropoli wrote the scriptural reflections for us. And then we have lay people saying, how does this look in the world? So families will get together, watch a video on God's story, and have discussion. Then they'll see a lay person share, how did that happen in our life? And share a story. And then we have a little audio of what we call kind of like a case study where people analyze this. And so it's really super simple. Host couple, 3 to 4 other couples together to in a way marvel at, this is the beautiful vision that the church has. This is what's important for us. So if you want to check it out, just First Fruits, one word, .family. And so that's our website, and it talks about the principles. It shows how it works and how to contact us for more information.
Excellent. And we'll include that link in the show notes for those of you who are listening on Spotify or any other kind of platform. So thank you for being on the podcast, Janet. Any final concluding words?
I think I'd actually go back to my very opening comments of thank you, Father Matthew, for this opportunity to talk about something that I love. I think if the lay people could understand and embrace their vocation, right, the world would be a very different place. I think it's easy sometimes to feel like I can't make a difference, but really, in that union with Christ and really trusting him and leaning into him to live your vocation, to live that apostolate in every day, you will make a difference.
Excellent. Well, to the listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help Starcross Bruce and other great podcasts at sgpn.com/give. You can give one-time monthly or join the Starcross Patreon. Tomorrow, we're going to start reading this document, Apostolicam Actuositatem, and we're going to start with paragraph 1 on the laity have become more conscious of their role. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. If you want more information like reading lists and playlists for individual documents and a reading plan, go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X.